Welcome to the second episode of the Engineered Perspectives podcast, where every episode offers you a different perspective on the diverse world of engineering. My name is Philip, and in this episode, I'm interviewing Preston Thorpe. Preston has spent just under 10 years in prison for non-violent drug crimes and currently still resides in a prison in Maine. However, Preston has some qualities that set him apart as an unusual prisoner. After moving to a new prison, Preston stepped back from prison politics and focused on self-improvement and started taking university courses. This reignited his interest in computer science and software engineering. For almost 2 years, Preston dedicated up to 14 hours daily to mastering his development skills. His extensive work on various projects led to an opportunity at Unlocked Labs, where he now works as a software engineer. He is among the few individuals in the United States who are allowed to work remotely from their prison cell. Preston's story is incredibly inspirational and shows how much one can achieve with hard work and dedication, no matter the circumstances. It also shows how much human potential is lost every day by a lack of education and rehabilitation in prisons. I have linked Preston's official blog post in the description, which I can only recommend everyone to read. In this episode, we did encounter some technical issues. Therefore, if you notice some abrupt edits, please understand that they were not intentional. Now, please enjoy this episode. Yeah, the first question would be, if you remember, how did you write your first line of code?
First line of code. That's funny. I think my first line of actual code was probably I was maybe like 13, and like I imagine most a good majority of people that it came about from video games. So it was a Counter-Strike. It was like a TeamSpeak server, you know what I mean, that I used to go on, and the guy was trying to, the leader of the clan was like trying to make his own, like TeamSpeak version. And I remember him linking me. He's like, yeah, like, you want to help out with this project? And he linked me like Visual Studio and like the MVSC, like MSVC, like C++, and I was incredibly confused, and it was a terrible introduction to programming with zero context as to like what it was. Like, I didn't know if it was like a GUI, you know what I mean, that you were like dragging and dropping. But yeah, technically that would have been my first like actual line of code.
So then did you stick with it? Did you stick with coding?
Not that project. I think after a couple of weeks of just sheer confusion, I realized that I was never going to contribute anything of any value to it. But I went on to learn, I think like the first language I learned, like that I could say I did somewhat productive things, was actually Perl, followed by PHP. But yeah, Perl, writing Perl on servers over PuTTY was it's quite different from today. I don't think I've seen anyone unironically write Perl since I've come back to programming a couple of years ago.
Okay, so from your first line now to your last line you wrote, you're currently working at Unlocked Labs, and I would like you to explain what Unlocked Labs is all about.
Yeah, so Unlocked Labs is a nonprofit that was founded by two juvenile lifers from Missouri, two people that were sentenced to life in prison, like when they were under the age of 18. And in 2013, Supreme Court ruled that it's unconstitutional to sentence juveniles to life in prison. So both of their sentences were overturned, and it so happens that Jessica, the CTO and co-founder, was an instructor in the prison teaching coding, and there's to this day, like there's still a program going on in there. So what they do is they have these tech, like coding, like course, like boot camp courses in quite a few prisons. They have one in New York, a bunch in Missouri. So they do a few things. They have the coding boot camps where they teach people and put them through their program, and then they also have the dev shop, which is they get contracts from I think the Institute for Higher Education in Prison is like one of their people they have a contract with, and they build websites and set up infrastructure for different as a way to employ the people that they teach to code. So not only there's other places that teach coding in prison, but I think what's really cool is that they it doesn't there's only so much good it does you, right? Like learning to code in prison, like, because you're not going to have with some exceptions, like you're not going to have any like meaningful experience, right? You have like a good head start, but I wouldn't say that on average you're necessarily like hireable, just because of it's very difficult to get access to the kind of technology that you need to know to actually be hireable. So the fact that they're able to give people opportunities and work experience right when they get out is super, super important. And then the other thing that they do, and that's actually what I work on, I'm on the product team. We have so I guess backstory, Jess and Chris and a team. So Jess is the CTO. Chris is another developer on the product team, and some residents in Missouri prison had actually built an LMS. So an LMS is a learning management system, and that's what's used by colleges everywhere, right? So some examples are like Canvas and Brightspace and Moodle, and that's you might sometimes Blackboard is another example. So they actually built an LMS of their own with the intention of it being designed specifically for prisons. And anything that happens in a prison is going to have a certain level of security requirements surrounding it and some very specific needs. And they actually, what they built in prison with very little to no references of what they were actually working on. Right, they had no idea like what an LMS looked like, or so the fact that they managed to build one that works and is actually in production in a couple facilities is super impressive. And they were released very recently. I think they've only been out for a little over a year, like a year and a half, maybe 2 years, and yeah, it's so I work on the product team, and we are essentially developing a new version of the LMS that they built that's going to integrate with other LMSs and allow for a single account to be able to access a bunch of different learning management systems and keep track of their progress and have like so they can get like a syllabus and they can get all their grades. One of the largest problems with education in the prison system is the staff can tell you whether or not you got a minor infraction in 2006, but they can't tell you with any certainty that you've done anything for education, or whether or not you've gotten your diploma or a master's degree. It's just not tracked. So there's the studies have been done and it says that the United States is essentially wasting in the billions of dollars on keeping people incarcerated when they could have been releasing them due to these good time credits. Like, completing education allows you to access time off, right? And there's just no proof. There's no way to prove a lot of times that you have completed this, right? There's no system in place to track progress. So the goal is to not only provide many more learning programs and things like Khan Academy, not specifically just college, which is, I think, the most popular use of LMSs is college, but this is like to provide access to education to justice impacted individuals and providing them with a way of like quantifying their efforts and making sure that they can get those good time credits.
Is it already deployed somewhere?
So the first version that they built is deployed in a couple states. So the version we're working is we actually started from zero. Originally, the idea was to build a middleware that would essentially just log and track information and be in charge of pretty much just like grabbing data in between an LMS and like some other interface, whether it be the first version or eventually something new. And as of a couple sprints ago, we actually moved towards just building version 2 from the ground up. So that's what we're working on right now.
Awesome. So before talking about your actual development and your development stack and all that, I wanted to start with the origin and the current situation. And so in your blog post, I think one thing that stood out was that one switch from I think it was your first prison to the prison you are now. And yeah, it feels like there was a big shift in your mindset and also in your like whole future. And yeah, I wanted to ask, was it a process or was it more a moment? I mean, you wrote about an epiphany, but yeah, maybe you can elaborate on that.
For sure. So I would say it was both, right? It was a process in that it's going to take a while to unlearn something that's just been kind of drilled into you for years. And coming up here from New Hampshire prison was a shock in a lot of ways, right? Because I came from maximum security, where you are in your room for 23 hours a day with no TV, with nothing. You have to be handcuffed through your door tray slot before you can go anywhere. And I came up here, and they just let me right into population, with a like a roommate and everything. So that was quite a shock. But prison is prison. So I did originally come here with the same attitude that I had down there, and I think the same attitude that a lot of people that have been subjected to longer prison sentences have, right? And it took a while before I realized that attitude and the way that I was looking at things was not only completely unnecessary up here, because the environment is just different, and you don't have a lot of the same stress and worry. And when that's not taking up space in your head, you're kind of left to wonder, like, okay, well, if I don't have to worry about drama and politics and the typical prison shuffle, like, what am I gonna worry about? There's you start to kind of think like, wow, I can kind of think for myself now, right? Like, I don't feel required to put on any kind of a show for anyone, or so slowly and after about a year, kind of had came to the realization, like, I'm just going to worry about me. I'm gonna focus on leaving here a better person than I came in, right? And there was, I think it was there, but there was, so it did take a while, to fully kind of like felt like a different person. But there was one day in particular that I'll never forget, that I think I was just listening to just couldn't help it. There was a conversation happening maybe one room away or whatever, loudly. And I just remember thinking, did I used to sound like that? People telling war stories and talking about getting high and how, trying to absolve themselves of any responsibility, for the, being here, or, and it hit me like, wow, like that was like, I really believe that. Like, that's how I used to think, and so, yeah, it was definitely an epiphany moment where I was like, this is just not life. Like, when did I become okay with this? Like, at what point did I decide that this is normal for me, right? Like, at what point did I say that this is okay? And unfortunately, with humor being one of the ways that we deal with, if I wasn't laughing, I'd be crying, right? So it's common to hear people joke about things that are, not funny and sometimes like devastating, right? They might joke and say, when they're leaving that day, they'll joke and say, yeah, I'll see you in a couple of weeks, right? And or I got one more bid in me, and that's, they're not being dishonest. Like, that's, people know they're going to come back, and they're okay with it. And at a certain point, I decided that I wasn't okay with it, and that this isn't normal, and I'm not all right with this.
How much time passed since you were first incarcerated to that moment?
So I had done 3 years, my first sentence, and then I was out for 14 months. And then I had been in for about 4 years on this sentence. So 7 years altogether.
And so from that moment, how long did it take till you find your way to software engineering, computer science?
So I was in the process already of getting enrolled in college. And that's something that's available here for free. And that's, it's not a common occurrence. Like, in the last prison I was in, if you can, and they say that you can go to college, right? But in reality, it's $800, like, for each class out of pocket. And it's correspondence, or it's either correspondence or, there's no access to even type your paper. Like, it's something where you're going to be, reading books at the library and writing things by hand. And then there's no guarantee that the class that you need to graduate, whatever, would even be offered. It's like a random 3 classes, like, that they offer for everyone. So you would have to do a life sentence before you happen to take, they happen to offer the classes that you needed to get a specific degree.
I assume that probably for previously the 7 years before, since then you haven't really learned anything, like any new skill.
Yeah, I would say, other than quite a bit of reading, more reading than, definitely a lifetime's worth of reading, right?
What kind of reading?
Everything. The historical fiction, depending on where you are, it's whatever books you can get your hands on. But in like a closed custody environment, you generally have access to a good amount of books, and then you can always have books sent in. So I've read, hundreds and hundreds of books. And like I do, I love learning. I've always loved learning, right? So before, um, before I got access to a computer, I was on a kick of like chemistry. So I got a bunch of organic chemistry books sent in, and I for a few months didn't. I think this was during COVID actually. I didn't. I wrapped up my TV and put it under my bed and just studied organic chemistry all day. And I to this day have stacks and stacks of notes. And then after chemistry, it was finance. So I got pretty deep into learning like options trading, and I would bother my family with text messages asking for prices of contracts and spreads and stuff. So it's not that there was. I mean, there certainly wasn't the amount of mental stimulation that there is now, but I've generally like sought out education in some form.
How did the shift to programming happen?
So when I was finally enrolled in college, it was getting my hands, having a laptop. And at that point, the only internet was in the rec building, which is where education is, as well as the gym. And so I was the barber. So I would be at rec all day, and I think I was downloading like Wikipedia articles to read in my cell, so that because there wasn't internet access in the rooms at that time, and I was looking up a bunch of like nostalgic information on like old like torrent trackers and like top sites and because I was big into the where scene and stuff as a teenager, and it just brought back memories of like and I started to think like, wow, like I have a computer, like I have 3 or 4 4 years left, I think, at that time. I was like, where else are you going to get 4 years of essentially responsibility free time to do nothing but learn something all day every day? It's not something that most people like, unless, I mean, maybe like teenagers, right? And that's why I think a lot of you see a lot of these like prodigy top coder competitive programming, like teenagers, right? Like because they learned super young and had or stayed up all night for years learning this stuff. So it was kind of an aha moment, because at that point I think I was invested in like trying to, I knew I obviously couldn't go back to the life that I was living. I had no intention to, but at that point I was, I knew I was going to have to figure something out. I definitely didn't want to get out and, lug shingles up a ladder or, so I think the plan was to like maybe drive a truck or something long enough to get, enough money to start trading options with. And, I had a, account on one of those sites that allow you to trade with like, fake money and stuff just to practice your strategies. And I did really well. I think my account was actually in the top like 25 out of like 40,000. Because once again, like I had nothing, that's all I did. Like that's kind of how I've always been, is like I pick something and it's like, and I'm not content until I understand it. Chemistry was like that. Like I realized that, like, wow, like I, would watch whatever on TV and be like, you know what, I'd like to understand that. And I just did not stop until I understood it. So it was the same thing. And so I got my hands on a computer, and I was like, wow, you know what? Like I think I could do this. I think I could, I could get what would probably take someone a decade or longer, right? Like of, free time or whatever. Like, I can do that. I can do that here. So I think I got an ebook, a couple ebooks on Python, and proceeded to essentially relearn to program. There was some information left over, but it had been so long that everything I thought I knew, some stuff came back, but I definitely had to relearn quite a bit.
So essentially, that means that you are a self-taught dev who basically relearned all of computer science, which you're up to now, in 2.5 years.
Yeah, not even that. A year and a half, probably.
Year and a half. Okay. So I think what's very interesting about that is that the art of teaching yourself is something that, is a very, very valuable skill. So would you say that this has been very easy for you since you already have that obsession with understanding new things? Or would you say that it was still a hard way?
I think I'm just one of those people that like, I'm going to be self-taught no matter what, kind of, right? And I am actually currently taking a semester off, but I've been in college, and I've taken several programming classes, and it's like anything I learn in school, my mind rejects. If I have to do it for homework, for some reason, I just don't care about it. Like, but if I want to learn, even if it's the same stuff I want to learn, for some reason, it's not the same for me. So, I wouldn't say it was easier. There's most definitely some things that I thought, wow, that would have been nice to know and not spend, 8 hours trying to do something that's not even possible. And that was very common before the internet. They ended up installing Wi-Fi that we could access from ourselves, because I would be on the unit over the weekend, not able to access internet. And I would be trying something for hours and hours and get to where I could go to Google or Stack Overflow and realize that I was not even trying something. It's just, I look back now and I'm like, what an idiot. But I feel like that's, I feel like that's why I've become kind of, I feel like I'm pretty decent at teaching, because the majority of the things, I'm able to, it's like, all right, well, this is how I wish someone would have been able to explain it to me. And for some reason, there's a lot of gatekeeping in computer science, and people that have some aversion to explaining things like in a way that people can understand without some immense amount of base knowledge. But yeah, I think I was going to be self-taught kind of no matter what.
Did you ever have the fear of learning something and then failing, especially in the beginning?
Yeah, I think so. I remember looking at a program that now I think anyone, including everyone watching, can probably write in their sleep. And I remember thinking, like, who could possibly remember all of that? Like, and I did a decent amount of programming as a teenager, but yeah, there was definitely a fear of like, wow, like, is this realistic? Like, is this something that I'm actually going to be able to take on? Because I think everyone kind of has the same feeling at the beginning, like, wow, like people really understand all of this? Like, is there anyone that like actually understands like all of this? But yeah, I think it's like anything, just do something n times over n days, and eventually it just kind of becomes natural like anything else.
I think many people have that fear of trying something new, and especially the failing. I mean, it's always easier to just stick with what you know and don't fail. So do you think that your environment was something that contributed to you just ignoring that fear?
Yeah, I think having very little distractions, right? And then the other thing is back then, the infrastructure and the concept of laptops being available for just to college students. It's not like they give them to everyone, but there are quite a few college students. So there's more college students here than any other prison in the country, I believe. But that comes with, obviously, right, a lot of caveats and a lot of security restrictions, and there's all kinds of things that they didn't simply just install Wi-Fi and give us laptops, right? So being computer inclined, I kind of found myself in a position where on one hand you have everyone that's going to use this and take advantage of it, and that's normal. That's everything, every privilege they give us. There's somebody taking advantage of it, and that's just something you have to expect. But I found myself in a situation thinking, like, this is an opportunity of a lifetime, and I definitely not only intend on taking advantage of it for myself, right, and teaching myself this skill and trying to make a career out of it, but also, I'm not trying to ruin this for anyone else. This is the first time it's ever been done in the United States, and I think, if it would have gone, too poorly, it could have been taken away as quickly as it came. So I ended up, helping out a considerable amount with, it's expensive to hire, a full-time, like, real IT person, let alone, there's there's a handful of facilities. So to hire that many would be a bit out of their budget. So after some time, and you eventually you build trust with people, and there's responsibilities involved, and I ended up helping out quite a bit, and just making sure that this could continue, and when ports needed to get unblocked for Zoom calls, or there's all kinds of things that I think the average, like, employee kind of didn't really understand. So that was an important part of it, was actually kind of like growing up and just dedicating to, like, let's not ruin this. Like, let's make this something that other people can benefit from.
Yeah, that's super nice. I think that's a very good thing also for hopefully the ones after you, right?
That's been really important, because there's a moral dilemma with everything, right? And in other facilities I've been in, there's no interaction with staff. Like, that's just, it just doesn't happen. But here it's just it's a different environment, and there's still people that look down on, like, anyone that have any kind of interaction with staff. Like, that's just, like, intrinsically wrong, and there's a very negative attitude towards anyone that's honestly just trying to better themselves is, like, looked down on. Like, that just automatically makes you a scumbag, right? But the way I see it is, like, I want to make prison like, it's, if you can say that you don't want what I had to go through for the next generation of people that have to go to prison, it's your responsibility, to improve that, because it's not just going to happen from one side. It has to be from everywhere. And I don't want what I had to deal with, like, for the next generation of people that have to go. Like, I want access to education. I want an environment where you're treated like a person. And that's something that Maine is really big on, is like humanizing people. It's not just treating you like, like a number. And yeah, that's been a big part of it. And that's why I'm so passionate about what I do for a living. Is like, we want to make prison a realistic place to correct. It's just corrections, right? It's like, it's not the Department of Punishment. If you don't leave here a better person than when you came, with, more opportunities, and if it's not realistic that you're going to be able to stay out, like, what exactly are they doing?
Yeah. So on your journey to where you are now, have there been role models, or some people that have especially influenced you?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, so engineers I look up to would be like George Hotz and Chris Latner. Yeah, like maybe the Primogen.
So do you actively think about those things, or is it more something like, do you actively look for people? I mean, probably once you got internet access, you had actually, it was the first time you probably were able to look for inspiration of people that you weren't close with.
Yeah, part of that mentality of like, I need to learn everything about this, right? Like, it's not just like how to program, and it's the history of and just looking at the technology that was around. I think, like, when I stopped, like, Ruby on Rails was like just becoming popular. That just like started. There wasn't like like, I've unironically written not like a full, but like a Java applet was like still a thing, like, so there was quite a bit of it was like learning about, I would see like the different technology, Fireship is like super like helpful with that, right? And it was like, so I would learn about these, newer technologies, and then want to know, like, okay, like, how did that come about? And like, how did that progress from what was around from when I remember? So that is what led me to learn about people like Chris Latner, for instance, and then watching him on like Lex Friedman and hearing those interviews. And yeah, so they're in the process of wanting to learn like the history of a lot of the technology that we use. That's kind of led me to like look up to certain people, for sure.
Do you listen to a lot of podcasts?
I wouldn't say a lot. There's a few. I listen to Lex Friedman pretty religiously. There's a few Rust podcasts that I listen to. Backend Banter with Lane, and I think that's about it.
Do you have a favorite Lex Friedman episode?
I think the second George Hotz interview is good, as well as he's got, I think it was the Jim Kellers are good too. He's a smart guy.
Yeah. So now maybe what I would like to know is your way to Unlocked Labs. So how did you, I mean, it's pretty, probably for you as well, surreal that someone who is still in prison has a real job. And so how did you get your first job? And especially what I would like to know is, because in your blog post, you wrote that Unlocked Labs was probably the only company that, that was going to do anything with my resume but chuckle and throw it away, in your words. And yeah, did you apply to any other companies, or was it even an option?
Yeah, so it was after, I think, like maybe 6, 8 months of working for the education department in at the prison. I'm at a different facility now. It's still a prison. I was transferred over here like 6 months ago. So this was like a year and a half ago. I had been working for education for some time, and this was when there was just starting to be talk of master's students being allowed to work remotely. There's a resident at that facility that is a like a part-time like professor at a or like a fellow at a university, and he's actually been able to actually be transported to, I think it's Colby College, to teach a class. So as we kind of realized that this would be a possibility, and I had built, like the database that they use to keep track of all the computers and the logins, and and I had been dedicated to learning, pretty much everything from. I would take a couple days a week and build data structures in C, and then I would be building stuff in the browser with TypeScript, and then writing Python and Go, and I was just kind of like trying to cram everything into my mind at that time, and I wasn't sure if I would be like ready to until you have a job and you understand like how things work, and Agile and Jira and sprints and you take it to that that's all when you're first starting out. There's no context or reference, but I heard that was a possibility, and I actually requested to one of the staff that worked in education, specifically in charge of technology at the facility, and I said, hey, you think you think that they would let us like apply for jobs? And he's like, yeah, maybe, I guess it's possible, right? So first what I did was I got permission to do open source contribution. And I actually contributed to my first like open source project, and kind of screenshotted like the process, and like wrote up like a kind of a draft of like, hey, like this is what this even is, like this is what it involves, and like printed it out and like sent it to the warden, and got explicit permission to do open source contributions. So that isn't too far away from working in theory, right? Because technically we are college students are permitted to access the internet, but you're not supposed to have any contact with anyone. Like there's no leaving comments on videos, there's no it's information only, there is no communication involved. So getting permission to communicate with people on GitHub and be involved in projects with other people is not that much of a stretch. So after doing that for a few months, I had heard that essentially it was going to be something they were going to consider, and I put in a request to look for a job, and I was granted, and I believe I'm still the only resident allowed to work that's not a master's student. For all other cases, that's been something that they've required, is that you graduate with a bachelor's. And so I did apply to, I couldn't tell you how many companies. Just trying to write a resume, let alone one with no experience, let alone, as a felon, like, let alone like currently in prison. um, you know, even a full page or two cover letter is like not enough context to fully understand it, right? So I must have applied to 50 different places, and understandably didn't hear back from one of them. I think there was one place that I'm pretty sure didn't actually read my resume. I'm pretty sure they just forwarded everyone this like coding challenge, like a hacker rank thing, and I think I completed it and then replied and mentioned something I had said in the resume, and I think they went back and looked at it and just didn't reply again. I can't say that I blame anyone. The chances that especially in this job market, the chances that you're going to take a chance on a junior, fresh out of school is low. The job market's really tough right now, so I really can't blame anyone for not taking that application seriously.
Yeah, but I mean, you landed a pretty good one.
I did. So there was a buddy of mine that has quite a following on LinkedIn. He's a PhD student, and he has a podcast type deal from his cell in the other facility. And he had came to me and asked if I was. I guess he had been, there's a community of prison reform people specifically kind of on LinkedIn, and it's not like a huge community. So I think he had been put into contact with Haley, who is the CEO. And he came to me about the possibility for a, I didn't know what they were working on. I didn't know anything about them. And I think a month or two later, I was, I put in a request to get access to LinkedIn. That's something that's very rarely given. And there's kind of like with the jobs to just a handful of people. And after getting approved, it was like, okay, like now who am I going to connect with? Right. Like it's, that was an interesting, like, all right, cool. Now I have one. Now what? Right. I don't really know anyone in the field. So I ended up I think I just cold messaged Haley on LinkedIn and kind of said, hey, like Steve, told me about you. And yeah, next thing you know, I was scheduling a Zoom call and met Jessica and Haley, and yeah, the rest is kind of history. So the Institute for, or I don't want to butcher it, but I think it's like the Institute for Higher Education in Prison, gives out grants to companies, I think, to hire formerly incarcerated people. So what they did was they applied to get a grant for 60 days for me and an associate of mine, and like as a trial period and slash kind of like internship. And when I was transferred here to this facility a couple weeks later, that ended up starting. And I told myself, like, hey, this is the only chance you're going to get. And the whole time, I'm continuing to learn, I'm continuing to build, other things. And yeah, I think, it's like technically like, a certain amount of hours or whatever. I just busted my ass the whole time and worked, constantly, and like really was like, like, I'm gonna prove that like I'm worth it, right? Like I'm gonna not only show gratitude for like, thank you for giving me this chance, but like, you want to hire me, right? Like, and here's why. Like, I will put the work in. Like, you will be getting pull requests.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Are there any qualities that quote unquote normal people don't have that you can bring? Is there something that, made you wonder?
Yeah, for that's actually what I kind of framed it in my resume, was like, I understand the crazy red flags here, but when you think about it, right, the state, I have insurance. Essentially, medical is paid through the state, so I don't need benefits. I'm in a situation where I have very, very few responsibilities, if almost none at all. So there is no chance that I'm not calling in sick. There's no oh, I got to pick up my kids, or someone's got to go. There's no I'm able to devote an amount of time that pretty much no one else is. I have time to learn your specific tech stack, faster than anyone else. And I'm going to be much more grateful than anyone else, just for the opportunity. And then there's also the, I pay taxes, and I pay room and board. I pay a percentage of my paycheck, but in general, I don't need as much financially as someone on the street. I just don't have as many responsibilities. So, the equivalent pay for me is much lower. So, I think it's actually a huge benefit. I personally, as long as you could assure the quality of work, right? I would probably rather have someone that has nothing else to do, but work, nothing else to do but learn your particular stack. So I think I bring a level of dedication and focus that is very difficult to get elsewhere.
Yeah. So do you know why no one has answered? Is it just because you wrote that you are currently incarcerated, or that you're an ex-con, or?
I would imagine because they probably don't, they might not take it seriously. It's literally never happened before. It's not, it's not a thing, right? So I don't necessarily blame them for being, doubting. I half expected them to call the prison or call the cops or someone and be like, yeah, you got a prisoner in there that just applied to work at my company. I saw a post on Hacker News a couple weeks ago of someone that was talking about how asking about resources for felons to find jobs, and there was a big discussion about people that had felonies and their difficult time, and one of them was talking about how he had been hired multiple times and then fired when they let go for other reasons, but right after they found out that they had a record. So if it's that difficult just to have a record from years ago, you're talking about someone that's currently in prison. So I would imagine that's why. I did hear back from one place that was justice focused. There was a company that specifically deals with something similar. I think they're pretty similar to us. They did get back to me and say we it was a kind turned they kindly declined instead of just not getting back to me. But yeah, since the blog post and since I've had and now I have work experience and more LinkedIn connections. Since then, I've had a couple other offers actually for jobs, either from GitHub. I'm pretty active in the open source community, So yeah, it would be much easier now after, the blog post was pretty popular. Like Andreas Kling retweeted it, and there was quite a bit of, um, you know, little stir about it. So yeah, I think now that it's kind of known that this is possible, I don't think it would be nearly as difficult. But at the time when I don't think anyone even thought that it was real.
So how do you learn new things? Do you have a strategy? I mean, you have so many languages and technologies on your LinkedIn, and I think it's always a hard question to answer for yourself. When do I know a certain thing? When do I understand something? So do you have a strategy? Do you do side projects? Do you just read about it? Is there anything you really have laid out for you, or is it more curiosity?
Yeah, I actually have a pretty specific, I feel like it is in general, it's like a kind of a difficult question to answer, like how do you learn new things? But people actually ask me that all the time. I've had private messages on, Element or Discord or emails or LinkedIn messages from people, asking how I, was able to learn certain things. And other than the obvious, like I have nothing else to do. I spend 14 hours a day programming. So like, all the time that you're spending, sending me this message, right? Like it's like I was building stuff. So with a language, I do a few advent of code problems until I feel like I have enough of the syntax down to just like understand, like, okay, like this is how you do, iterables or loops or, kind of the basics. And then I immediately pick something and build it. And that's, I will swear by project-based development. I think that's absolutely the only way to learn things. I use this as an example all the time. Is like you can learn what a hammer is and what a saw is, and but it doesn't teach you how to build a house, right? And I think there's a big focus on like the kind of like the boot camp kind of like style of like until you've built something fairly substantial, I think it's difficult to say that it. So that's most definitely been my style, is like build something.
So do you have time slots when you don't work, where you do that stuff? Or
as far as like time, at the beginning before I was employed, I chose like Sundays, and I would have low level Sundays, and I would build implement like a hash map or a web server, or something in C, like from scratch, like pretty much like choose a data structure every week and implement whatever with it. And that went on for quite a while. Now that I work, like pretty much after and I don't necessarily kind of keep hours. If I'm kind of on a roll or onto something in the middle of a problem, like I'll keep working until 11. Sometimes it happens, but generally on the weekends I'm working on side projects. There's a couple things that I'm kind of contracted, you could say, kind of. I still work for education here, so I build different in-house software projects for the prison, and then there's also like personal side projects, or like open source stuff that I maintain, like either libraries or past projects. And I always have at least one or two like side projects going on in like that are less, just like more like for fun. Right now it's like building a could say like a toy language in OCaml.
So since you have access to the internet, you also have access to unlimited distractions. Do you have do you struggle with distraction now that you have more access on a daily basis? Do you is it easy for you to just say, no, I'm now doing side projects and coding? Do you have any strategies for that?
I do, actually, and that's another thing I bring up fairly often when people ask me about how I learn things. I was very, very strict for the first, I would say, full year. I didn't allow myself any entertainment. My TV was, unplugged in my room. Now I use it as a second monitor. But the only YouTube videos that I would allow myself were programming related or programming adjacent, like the Primeagen or whatever. And now that I have a job and I feel like I've made significant progress, I do allow myself, I still don't watch movies or TV, or, I might, watch other YouTube videos or just hang out on Matrix or, but it's generally programming related. Even my, entertainment is going to be programming related. And that's just something I've stuck with from the beginning. And it's not nearly as strict as it was. I had a lot riding on it, right? It's like there was no, the consequences, it was a very clear, this is what you have to gain, right? If I'm not able to succeed at this, I'm not going to have a career, and I'm going to get out of prison with nothing and, not have, hope for the future versus, so the stakes were high. And I think when you have the discipline to, right, it's so it's not when you've gone 7 years of your life with nothing but, sometimes pieces of books to read that you had to fish under your door, across the tier, and there's it's gross, and and you're a good day for you might be when you got a cup of coffee fished up to you through a toilet, right? When you've had nothing, it's a lot easier to have discipline when you have something, right? It's I never ever try to take anything I have for granted.
So I think something that fits is actually a quote from you that is, so I think these days the only answer to what you should learn is really you just need to learn everything. And especially with eliminating distractions, I think that is very important to even be able to learn all the things. And do you think that it's gotten harder once you had a job? Because that is one responsibility that probably did take a lot of your time.
Yeah. So the quote, I needed a kind of a catchy title for the post. So, obviously, right. I don't think anyone in the entire field understands the whole stack, right? From the CPU to the, to all the way up the TCP, and, it's so clearly I think, what it was what the quote was intended for was I think it's gonna get to a point where the days of just being, you see maybe people's LinkedIn has it's a MERN stack developer, right? And it's, self-identifying as, as knowing one particular stack. With AI and, it really seems like it's going to get to the point where that might not be an option for, it might not be as easy as like taking a, whatever, a 6-month course at a boot camp and just getting a 6-figure job right after, right? Like seems like we're heading in a direction where the value that you get from hiring someone who has maybe been through that particular course is like, ChatGPT is definitely not there yet, but I think especially over the next few years, it's going to be, a lot more difficult to find work. So something that I struggled with at first was where I didn't have nearly as much direction, and I didn't have any like friends or contacts in the industry to like kind of tell me like what I should be learning or what I should be doing. Like I've focused on everything. Like I said, I would have a couple days a week where I would just, do data structures and low level stuff and see. And if I spent an hour doing something else, like I had a guilt in the back of my mind, like that I, was like wasting time. Like, oh, that's, I could have been learning something else. And for engineers that are, have years of experience, I think a lot of times, like, it's easy to forget just how complex something that you take, is insignificant in your day. Like, you might get an error, right? That like maybe your path variable got screwed up, and you can't link, your like DLLs or SOs, or it's pointing somewhere else, and your compiler can't link anything. Like, that's an easy fix, right? That's like I feel like most people, that's one command line, one shell command, and that's something that just to try to explain, to someone new, right? Just to try to explain what actually happened and like what it is and like what, like what it's trying to do and like what it can, is so much more complex than I think we sometimes remember, right? So that's kind of, I think the reason for that post was actually someone came to my door and was asking me about something I was doing, and I thought, like, okay, and I had to like go down like 5 or 6 levels of abstraction before I was like, no, just download something, right? But it's like in reality, it's like, oh, this is like like writing some Rust bindings for like libcurl. Like, oh, what's libcurl? It's a C library for TCP connections. Well, what's a C library? What's a TCP? And eventually you get to the point where let's download something, right? Like, so I think that was the actual inspiration.
So what is your current development stack?
For at work, we have it's Laravel based, which I guess I'll get into I'll tell you my opinion afterwards. But the front end is React, back end is Laravel. Other than that, nothing else real special. We use GitHub Actions, and there's nothing else like particularly like. It's a pretty simple dev environment. At first I wasn't too excited about PHP because I remembered PHP from which didn't have the same reputation it has now. I did notice that it has it's like probably one of the most hated languages by mostly people that have never used it, or people that haven't used it in 15 years. But I found after getting used to it and actually getting productive with it, it's absolutely a framework for people that are more concerned with building the product and like what the product does, instead of maybe like people, honestly, kind of people like me that are more excited about the building and the technology involved in the application than, necessarily sometimes like what it even does.
Have you run any performance benchmarks on the backend?
No, I have not. It's still in the early stages. We just, as of 2 or 3 sprints ago, we started from, a new initted project. So it's not quite at the point where we're going to be perfing it. But another thing is that it has some interesting requirements. It has to be able to operate entirely offline because it's going to be deployed in prisons. So we have to build everything planning for the worst case, and I think it would be really nice to be able to count on having internet access for stuff like authentication, and is quite a nightmare when you have to essentially implement it yourself. You can't count on logging in with Google or Microsoft or so that's actually been my most recent ticket project, has been trying to SSO our users into an LMS that's running locally. At this point, it's Canvas, which is a Ruby on Rails app. So trying to get that set up in a completely offline environment has been quite a challenge.
So do you also do the hardware, or is it only the software?
In my development environment is I have these laptops that they have for the college students. I actually have a separate one for work, and it runs next to this one, and that way I'm able to run like the product locally on mine, and then I have Canvas hosted on the one next to it, and that allows for some level of testing in the environment that it's going to be deployed in, but very difficult to reproduce that kind of testing, because there's going to be so many different variables where you're not going to have, this has to deploy and we're not going to be able to access it, right? Like there may be some or many instances where we can have some kind of a VPN set up where we can configure from remotely, but this has to be something that we have to be able to deploy, and it needs to run completely isolated offline, and it presents some pretty unique challenges.
So what do you currently use as your personal development stack? So probably Linux. My personal choice is I have Arch Linux on this laptop, which I did a bare install. That was something that I took on when I feel like it's one of the best ways to truly understand everything that could go wrong on any given day. Like if you've done a bare install, there's a good chance that you configured it to begin with. So and I use NeoVim. I've been using NeoVim for about a year. When I was able to make the switch to Linux, I installed i3 originally, and I told myself that I would strictly use a terminal, and that's something that I think a lot of beginners are kind of afraid of the terminal, and there's like so many ways that they have now to like abstractions for Git, and like IDEs have all of these extra features. Like I told myself, like, I want to be as efficient as possible, and if I'm going to do something, like I want to do it well to the best of my
abilities. So when I switched over to this setup, I never installed a GUI file manager. I never installed VS Code or an IDE. I pretty much strictly develop from a terminal. I don't use, lazy Git or anything like that. Like I kind of, devoted myself to I'm like really going to get good at the command line, and that has paid off in dividends. If I see someone like clicking around a GUI file manager, like looking for files, it's just so cringy. You're like, that is one command. But so yeah, that's so NeoVim. I use WesTerm, which I was an Alacrity user for quite a while. Something about the Lua config. Once you've spent enough hours configuring your NeoVim setup, any time that there's an opportunity to configure something with Lua, I was curious and I ended up switching over, and I like it quite a bit.
Okay. Do you remember what bootloader you chose?
I Grub 2.
Okay. So you're still on X11, right?
I am. Yeah, I run DWM now.
So when is the Wayland switch gonna happen?
It's funny you say that. A couple weeks ago, I can't quite remember why. So I have on my my work laptop, I have Ubuntu installed, but it had the same. I think that's something that you use Linux long enough, and everyone kind of understands that distros like really don't matter, right? Like it's just pretty much you're choosing a package manager. If you're gonna have your own customized window manager and all the software you're going to install is going to be the same, it's pretty much what package manager do you want. So this was running DWM with my sane config.h. It looked identical other than the package manager. You really couldn't tell. Something happened with my I think I upgraded Ubuntu over SSH, which is not recommended. They tell you they don't recommend it. Whatever, I did it anyway, and something broke. And this laptop is 99% of the time I SSH into it. I have a tmux session, and so it really doesn't matter to me as long as I can get a TTY, whether I have a desktop environment at all or not. But just to get things working, I had a Sway config because I did switch to Sway for some time, and I think it was a multi-monitor issue that made me switch back, and I tried out DWM. So I ended up moving to Sway over here, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna give Wayland another shot. And I looked up and found DWL, which I guess is a Wayland fork of DWM. And I think I just tried to get too smart with it and tried to write my entire config before I even booted up one time. And that's just not smart. I tried to boot into it and it was black. I couldn't even get a terminal. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to use X11 until I cannot anymore.
So you gave up on Wayland.
Yeah. I mean, I'd probably do it again and just use a default config for DWL and then slowly kind of make it my own. But are you run Wayland?
Yeah, I started on Ubuntu with i3 and X11, and I remember that all the xrand r, I don't know how you pronounce it, but the commands. Xrand,
yeah.
Yeah, and I was lost, and then I actually I did what you said. I thought, hey, let's do a bare install on Arch, and let's just really get to know Linux. And I did this. I mean, you have to choose everything, right? You have to research your bootloader, your whatever. It's like everything. And then I was looking at X11, and while I was looking for it I think on the Arch Wiki, it says that Wayland is coming to actually replace it. And I thought, well, let's just go with Wayland then. And I installed it. It's now, I think, 1.5 years ago. I installed Wayland with Arch, and I've basically had no issues since then. And multi-monitor works, plug and play works on the laptop. I think it's great. The only thing is some GUI applications, like, I don't know, Spotify or like Obsidian, the note-taking app. They had some problems, some issues in the beginning, but now you can actually almost all of them have like at least one flag you can set, and then you can boot into Wayland. So right now I'm perfectly happy, and I think that it's also like, for example, the Sway. I mean, Sway and i3, you can just, the configs are just matching, so no issues there. Alacrity works great, and the speed is really good, and especially the multi-monitor setup has just been really fun.
Now that you say that, I'm trying to remember why, because I ran i3 for a while, and I moved to Sway pretty seamlessly. In fact, I would with X11, this boots up and I have to run startx. With Sway, I would get a TTY and just run Sway, and it would boot up fine. And I'm not sure why it is that I had, like, I think maybe it was Sway. Yeah, I went directly from Sway to, for some reason I was thinking that I was in i3, and that was the one that had problems. But yeah, I don't know. I think it was something about it was maybe a Firefox release, like a major release that needed to get patched, that if it was running any kind of video streaming on another monitor, it would crash. So, and that's actually, I think that was right when I started work. It was like the same week, and I was like, man, I gotta get a solid window manager set up and not spend 2 weeks in configuration hell. And of course, I chose one that makes you patch your own, DWM. You have to write your config in C and like patch the software yourself. There's like no binary releases, and but yeah, surprising, I got it up and running pretty quick.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, if it works, you can keep it, right? Especially for developing. If you have no problems, why would you change it? But I think that there are certain things that when it does that is easier, especially without the server client stuff of X11, that Wayland just, I think, improves on. And for someone new, why would you spend time learning something that's probably gonna die? I mean, it won't disappear, but it's at least, maybe, I don't know, the maintenance or something will not be there at some point.
Yeah, it's certainly easier to develop for Wayland. I think anyone that's ever had to work with libx11, it is a nightmare.
Yeah.
Just, that API is just notoriously awful.
So on LinkedIn 5 months ago, you actually wrote about thinking about switching to Nix, and I was actually a pretty similar timeline. I was thinking about switching to Nix as well, because I think Nix is probably the OS, or it has a big difference to most of the other distros, and I think especially the config you only write once is really cool, and that you can just try out packages in a like external session, and then they just not block the system or anything. But I think you haven't done it yet. Did you still plan on doing it?
Yeah, Nix is one of those things that I will probably forever be like about to try out. I have a couple of friends that are like really, really into it, and the testing and dev environment for Exa or Eza, the Exa fork that I help maintain. It's like the LS replacement on GitHub. But the lead maintainer is like a big Nix fan, and I've heard so many good things about it. But the documentation is horrible, and there is so much conflicting information as to like what you are and aren't supposed to use, and there's things that are flagged like unstable, like, you know, you shouldn't use this, and everyone's like, no, but you do use that. And then there's other stuff that's like that's defaulted or whatever, and they're like, no, but you don't use that. It's like it's something that at this point I have not quite enough time for, but for work, this whole particular setup with needing to ship an LMS as a standalone application, and then our application, there's a lot of configuration that goes into both of these, and a flake is probably going to be the way that we end up deploying it, because I think from what I've, Docker is great, right? But I don't think it's quite as like reproducible, and like I'm pretty sure that you can get it just about the equivalent of like plug and play or whatever, like with the Nix flake. So it might be that I have an excuse to spend time learning it for work, and that'll be what I needed. But I did install the package manager because I heard that it can go on top of whatever. It's not like trying to install apt on Arch, right? Like you're going to break everything. The Nix package manager you can pretty much get on top of your current system, and I did install that a while ago. It never went anywhere. I told myself, you know what, the only way to do it, it's just like with anything else, you just gotta do it. You pretty much just install it, and hey, you gotta figure it out. It's now your operating system, and you gotta use it.
Yeah. I think the Arch wiki is probably one of the best wikis that are just out there.
Yeah, it's hard to. There's not a lot of information that you could need that's not there.
Yeah.
Pretty much every problem you could run into is documented there somewhere.
Yeah. So going from software to hardware, I wanted to know what your current keyboard is. Because, you already told me, but...
Yeah. So I had, as one of the projects I have to build for this place, required me to order some hardware, particularly RFID scanners, and it's just like an internal system that they needed built. And I had the opportunity to order a keyboard for myself, and obviously it's like couldn't spend all that much money, but I wanted a mechanical one. I ended up getting a Keychron, and the amount of time that I spend typing, it was just combined with the fact I have some nerve damage in my neck, and they actually recently took me off the medication I'm on for that. So long story short, I started getting neuropathy in my hands, and I legitimately, by the end of the day, I couldn't type, and I had to like kind of hold my hands up and kind of like peck the keys because I couldn't even move my fingers. So I had to get a note from the medical department to be able to order my own keyboard. And with anything here, especially when you're, you don't have any control, you're kind of just here, and like, if you get permission to do something, you I knew that I pretty much was going to be able to order it, and then that's it. But right, like if if it wasn't the one I wanted, or if I got the wrong, it's kind of like too bad, right? It's not easy to get permission for these things, and it's not as simple as like being able to return it. You're not in control of when it comes in and the box being opened. It's not completely out of your control, right? So I spent days on YouTube looking up, what's the best keyboard for, like RSI and like wrist problems and stuff. And there has been a ton of hype around the Glove 80. It's like the new thing. I think previously it was probably the Kinesis Advantage that was like the best of the best. But Code to the Moon is a pretty great YouTube channel. He does a bunch of keyboard reviews, and I saw the one about the Glove 80, and I was like, you know what, that's it. That's the one I need. And didn't particularly want to spend $400 on a keyboard, but it was getting to the point where I just couldn't type. And, by 3 or 4 in the afternoon, hands weren't working anymore. And it came in about a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, and immediately I was like, oh my goodness, I wasted $400. The linear column staggered, it like just slowed me right down. All my keyboard shortcuts, Vim, and then all the window manager shortcuts are so burned into my brain from muscle memory, not from like what key it actually is, just where it is, kind of. So now there's just this thought layer in between what I'm trying to do and what I'm actually doing. And it slowed my typing down to a third of what it was. And I couldn't, barely use any of my shortcuts. I was pissed. I was thinking I wasted $400. But I can happily say that after some configuration and some modifications I didn't have to take the keys off, right? But those are the only keys that I use. So I figured, whatever, I'll just take, it's just easier to have them not be there. I'm thinking about putting the bottom ones back because of the curve and the key well. It's actually like comfortable to use the bottom keys that you probably wouldn't normally would have. You'd have to like, excuse me, but you'd have to strain your wrist too much on a regular keyboard. But so I just have a layer key. Escape is in the proper place. That's one thing that is great about these, is I've been remapping caps lock to escape forever, and these actually come with escape in the proper place. So I have it as a layer on hold to activate the layer, and I just have the numbers, and everything is essentially either the home row or one row away, and that's was it worth it? It is absolutely pays off. I highly recommend the ortho like linear keyboards.
Did it help with your pain?
Yeah. Now I'm able to have, it's kind of bootleg, can't see it, but there's like a box and a milk crate on one side of me, and then 2 boxes on the other side of me that stacked up. So I'm able to have my arms pretty much resting at, like, directly at my sides, and that like keeps my back straight. And I haven't had any problems at all since getting this and getting comfortable with it. So it helped. Yeah, it helped out quite a bit. I definitely recommended it to anyone with wrist problems.
Yeah, that's great. It's crazy that people still, use normal keyboards if one thinks about it. I mean, they are like, it's a health risk, right? So it's not even only comfort. It's actually like people have damage from using it so much.
Yeah, and they're still popular. Like, people still pay. Like, it's not like they're just using whatever cheap keyboard like came with their computer. Like, people are actively spending lots of money on regular keyboards, which I think will probably change in the next few years or so. I would imagine, with how popular these are getting, it's going to be it's going out of style to have a regular keyboard.
Do you have any stuff that you want to learn in 2024? Any new technologies, projects, side projects, maybe not work related?
Yeah, I actually made a list the other day of some 2024 goals. Definitely want to continue with OCaml. I've been enjoying that quite a bit. When I first started using it, I wrote a couple blog posts about kind of my first impressions of the language, and I can say that after getting used to the paradigm and after getting used to the syntax, I'm enjoying it quite a bit. There's far more concepts that came from OCaml in Rust than I kind of realized at first. It's a great language. I'm enjoying it quite a bit. So I definitely would like to just kind of continue down that path. I might pick up Haskell. Just, I don't know if it's something I necessarily want to pursue for any more than just like maybe to learn a bit more about the paradigm. But definitely OCaml. And I built a couple backends with Actix. I really enjoy writing Rust, but I think I'm gonna give the front end Rust with Leptos, or even something like HTMX, and getting that set up with the templating instead of the typical just like JSON backend and JavaScript front end.
So the whole internet is currently very JavaScript, TypeScript focused. And I mean, you are not really TypeScript, JavaScript focused, which is pretty cool. Do you think that the web is continuing to be JS, TS focused? Or do you think there's like a good chance that we will move away from it in the future?
Yeah, I think it depends on like how useful WebAssembly gets. I mean, I think its best use right now is Zig is using it to kind of like bootstrap their compiler, and I had started this kind of toy language I'm working on with the intention of targeting WebAssembly. It looks like a reasonable, like you could reasonably start a project and say, okay, I want this to compile to WASM. Like it's not like writing a backend for a compiler is a pretty ambitious project, right? But WASM makes it realistic that you could implement that. It's not, it's difficult, but it's not like just completely absurd, right? But so my original intention was like, okay, like maybe something that is able to perform like basic like DOM manipulation or whatever, like the language could do kind of like a scripting thing for the DOM. And after a decent amount of reading, I found out that there is actually all DOM manipulation is still handled through JavaScript layer. Like there is no direct access to the DOM from WebAssembly. So I think it's going to depend a lot on how that kind of continues. Like there's a lot of caveats to WASM where garbage collected languages are more difficult to target just because of that extra runtime. And there's definitely some things preventing that from just, I feel like there's been an attitude in some communities like it's just going to be taken over, entirely by WebAssembly. And I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case. However, I'm definitely not TypeScript focused. I would never, if it was up to me, I would never choose to write a backend particularly. Like, in my opinion, it's just not what it's for, right? Like JavaScript is a language that is flexible intentionally to be able to manipulate the DOM. It's like, it's an advantage in some ways, right? Like writing backends in JavaScript is just not, I don't know, it's just not something I would ever voluntarily do. But yeah, I think, I don't know, it's pretty popular. There is definitely, that's kind of becoming a more mainstream attitude. But I think we'll see what actually, I think a lot of the tooling in JavaScript land is moving to Rust. It's hard to believe that the tooling for JavaScript land was at one point written in JavaScript. Like, that is kind of its own absurdity, that, they're wondering why something takes like 45 minutes, like, because it's, you are malloking primitives. Like, you're allocating x equals 10 on the heap. Like, that is not going to be fast.
So I actually wanted to know if you have a 10-year goal, or something like a long-term goal. I mean, you're only, if I'm correct, you're only into incarcerated till May 25th, 2025.
Yeah.
Which is pretty soon.
Yeah, a year and 4 months left, hopefully.
Yeah. So do you have a long-term plan for after?
I do. Yeah. So currently my plan is, continue working with Unlock Labs, and I kind of intend on building solutions to a lot of problems that virtually all prisons have. Prisons are incredibly far behind in technology-wise, like incredibly so. Like, people would be very surprised at how little technology is used in paper, and it's incredibly inefficient. So my ultimate goal is to essentially start a SaaS company selling software solutions to corrections facilities, specifically with the goal of like increasing the quality of life for the residents and solving some real pain points, while also trying to, much like my employer, like employ either currently or formerly incarcerated people, to, in pretty much as many positions as possible. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be a nonprofit, but it's definitely a goal of mine is to try and provide opportunities for people. I think the current goal of education access is absolutely great. There's a lot of technology access problems that need to be solved. There's a lot of barriers that most facilities are going to have. Maine is currently much farther ahead of all other states as far as access to technology. This interview would not be happening if I was anywhere else. So that's something I'd definitely like to try and solve, and I'd like to make it realistic that more states could adopt something like this. Access to this technology and education specifically, like, changed my life more than anything ever has. It is pretty much the only reason that I have any kind of like hope for the future. So I absolutely would like to be a part of like making this possible for more people.
That's awesome. Is there something that is on your mind when you think about May 2025, like the first thing you want to do once you get out?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Yeah, I'd like to, seeing my family is going to be great, and I'm sure they're going to be here to pick me up. I live pretty, they have it, this is a pretty comfortable place, right? Like, they have an annex, like essentially a store where we can go and buy things that you might not like necessarily like expect to see, right? And the point of sale like system that sells us that like keeps track of all the things is written in VBA with a Microsoft Access database. That's something I currently have to kind of maintain, and also something I intend on, a pain point I intend on solving. But so the point is that like there's like plenty of I mean, I'm definitely looking forward to sushi. That's something that I miss. Definitely gonna go get some sushi. But as far as like, I feel very normal. Like I have, obviously have a job. I have an identity online, and plenty of people I talk to every day have no idea that I'm incarcerated, and it is very humanizing. It's very, it's makes me feel normal. In fact, the respect that I get from staff is like legitimately enough to make you feel like, like I might have to live here, but compared to the remainder of my time in other states, I don't necessarily feel like I am incarcerated. So yeah, I miss my family. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing them. But yeah, other than that, I'm just excited to get out and maybe share my story at different conferences and stuff. They've interviewed me about this particular, my story and whatnot, for a couple of conferences, like with the higher education in prison and stuff. So going there to like speak in person is going to be great. Meeting my coworkers in person, I'm super excited for that. They're awesome people. They're in St. Louis, so I can't wait to go and like be at the office and like be at the meetings in person. I'm like definitely looking forward to that.
That's awesome. That's super cool. So my last question would be about books, since you have read so many. Just your favorite books. Technical, non-technical. Technical, non-fictional, and fictional.
For entertainment, I think historical fiction is probably my favorite. There is a couple series in particular by Con Iggulden, the Conqueror series, and the Emperor. It's like the Genghis Khan and Julius Caesar historical fiction series. Those are just phenomenal. Highly recommend those. Fiction, the Game of Thrones series is awesome. Anthony Ryan has a series. Wow, of course it's going to escape my memory right now. Other favorites are like what is this? Man, of course, I'm just completely drawing a blank right now. Joe Abercrombie is a good fiction author. Like Logan Nine Fingers. I can't remember the name of the book, of course. As you can tell, it's actually been a while since I've read. It's one of those things where you spend so much time with no TV that when you do have one, you know what I mean? It's like you don't do a lot of reading. But as far as like technical books, the Go programming language, it's actually like Brian Kernighan, the same one that wrote the the C programming language, like the classic book that Hello World comes from. That was a good book. The Rust book is awesome. It's a great learning resource.
The official one?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. That's Rust really does have some of the best learning resources. Like people in that community are very, quite dedicated to making learning as easy as possible, for sure. The Rustlings course is awesome. Like probably the best like interactive course out there. It's really well done. People would, I think Zig actually Zig has a similar. I'm not sure if it's official, but there's definitely, I think there's like a Ziglings like course or something like that. I might have butchered the name, but yeah, that's a good resource. But yeah, I think my favorite books, I would have to say, is probably the Conqueror series by Con Nicholden. I would have to been asked the question before, and I think that's the official answer. That's a phenomenal series.
Have you read all of the Game of Thrones books?
Yeah, I read the second and third ones like multiple times. I think I've read the third one like 3 or 4 times.
You have not watched the TV series, right?
Nope. I have watched some of the first season, but yeah, that's been on the list of things to do when that's available for sure.
So do you plan on watching it?
I do.
Even though that there's been some controversy.
Yep, I know, and I've had people tell me like, don't watch it, right? Things they ruined, and every year they say, oh, the book is, the next book is going to come out. I don't think that's ever going to happen. But yeah, I definitely would like to see it. Did you see it all?
Yeah, I saw it all.
Did you read the books as well?
No, none of them. So I actually waited with Game of Thrones as well. I think it has been 2 or 3 years ago. I watched them all pretty quickly. Then, like you can binge watch Game of Thrones very well. But yeah, like the end is. I mean, the general consensus on that is pretty. Yeah, pretty. Everyone agrees.
Yeah,
it's not that good.
Yeah, that's what I heard. No, that's honestly, I'm looking forward to the ability to like binge watch. It's just so much more satisfying to know that you can just, having to wait a week in between episodes is no definitely. Fun. There's a few things I definitely want to binge watch for sure. Game of Thrones is one of them.
You mentioned that video games were your portal into software engineering. Do you plan on maybe trying out a little bit of video games when you have the chance?
So when I was a teenager, I moved from I pretty much across the country when I was 13 or 14, and so no friends, new area, but there was now not dial-up internet where there was previously. So that's when I built my first computer, and the first thing I did on it was play video games. And I realized fairly quickly that I really don't actually care about video games. That was more my brother's thing. He had an Xbox and would play up, and I was much more interested in like the, kind of like the community around them, and then subsequently not being able to afford them, like the wares community, and then that leads to IRC channels, and that is eventually how it turned into programming and just in general, that was kind of back when key gens were possible, and there was a whole scene behind I don't know. It was a big thing back then. I guess it's probably not as popular now with DRM and just everything being online. So it kind of wouldn't do you any good anyway. But yeah. So I actually don't really care. I don't know if it's the attention span. I just don't have the attention span for video games, but it's just never been what I'm really interested in. Yeah, it turns out I was more just to computers than it ever was the actual game.
So one last thing I wanted to ask is, you wrote in your blog post, and don't start with Python, but that's a hot take for another post maybe. So now I have to call you out and ask why not. Yeah,
so I think it's related to some of the other things we've been talking about, right? Where there's a couple different reasons, right? One, the abstraction level of Python is almost unmatched as far as what you're able to do in one line as, versus the equivalent in not even C, right? Like we'll say Go or Rust or C or when you learn immediately that, things like, and don't get me wrong, when I write a decent amount of Python, list comprehensions are great. They're super convenient, but for someone that's first learning, a lot of the concepts, and then the lack of types, right? Like the I know that there's like gradually becoming like typed, and you can declare your types, but I think it's a shock when that's your first language, and then you go to something statically typed. Personally, when I got back into it, it was Python, and I went right to Go. And writing Go and trying to, I think I was doing like leak code problems. Like I was amazed at how difficult it was to remove something from an array or a slice at an arbitrary index, right? Like there's not even a method for it. It's like so I think it just instills that certain like fundamental things like are significantly easier than they really are. And it's not to say that they shouldn't be that easy, but I think learning at that level of abstraction, although it makes it much easier to learn, I think there's better options. I generally recommend Go as the first language, and recently had someone ask me, and I recommended Go, and they came back a couple months later and thanked me. I'm sure if it was the opposite, right, and you were to learn in C, and then when you started to write Python, you'd probably be pleasantly surprised. Like, wow, this is cake. Like this is all I have to do. And I think you're better off learning the cost first, and then learning the abstraction. And then the other thing is that a lot of people are, if your goal is to get a job, right, the Python jobs are absolutely not going to be junior level jobs. The overwhelming majority of the time, Python jobs are going to be back-end jobs, and back-end junior roles are just not necessarily like a thing. They exist, but they are far less common than front-end. If you're talking about web, development, then yeah, like the overwhelming majority of the jobs out there are going to be for juniors are going to be front-end jobs. So I think if you're going to invest, and granted, learning Go, right, it's not like it's the same thing. It's still a back-end language, but I just think it's something that is not said enough, that there is plenty of information out there, and this is like information that I consumed a couple years ago, was that learn Python instead of JavaScript because the jobs pay more, right? It's like, as my first language, what should I learn? Like, oh, well, Python jobs pay that much more. It's like, well, that's because they're back-end jobs, and they're not junior, you know what I mean? They're not junior positions. Most back-end positions are senior or just regular, mid-level jobs. So I just think that's something that no one ever really says. And so that was the reason for the hot take.
So when would you say is a good time to move from a less abstract language to a more abstract language?
I would say, when you have a good understanding of programming, meaning the equivalent of the tools, right? Like versus like I compare it all the time. I think I said it before. Learning to program is like learning what tool, like how to, what a hammer and a saw are, and then how to use them, right? And then building, software engineering, like building a house, like is very different, right? So when you're comfortable enough where you are building things, I think, if you have a few projects that you've done from scratch, whatever, even if, I'm not saying completely from scratch, but yeah, when you're comfortable enough with whatever language you're using to build things successfully, I think then you should migrate towards, all right, what am I going to have to know for my first job, right? And focus on the, know your fundamentals first, right? And then once you have that down and you're comfortable enough to where you're building things, then, all right, what am I going to need to know specifically for the job? And then focus on that.
Do you think a beginner should go down to, like, how low should the level be that a beginner goes down to learn about computer science, software engineering? Like, would you say C maybe is a good way to at least come across at least once? Or would you say maybe go down to assembly or even lower?
I think, I think in this economy, in this job market, right? Like, I think you're better off knowing how things work, like just understanding like the concept behind a Turing machine, right? You don't have to write machine code or you should be able to, not that you should be able to like program like, useful products in assembly, but like assembly should make sense to you. Like it should make sense to you what's going on. Like the fact that you have to load things into registers and then perform some math operation and store the value in another register or in memory somewhere, or the concept of the stack pointer and the base pointer and that should all make sense. Like you don't have to be able to use it, but I think that should be something that you have at least a basic understanding of. And then C is going to teach you the value of the cost, right? Like in Python, it's like that's the thing is you're not learning the cost. C teaches you the cost because you have to explicitly malloc, right? And everyone, it's well understood that like mallocing is slow, right? Like if you can write your program in such a way where you keep the majority of the memory like in the stack, and you're passing around pointers and that, like, I think having an understanding of what's really happening, right? When you write more abstracted languages, I guess a lot of the times you don't have any control. Like, so I guess that doesn't always apply. But I kind of tend to compare things to Rust because you very much can write as performant as a program as you want. You can absolutely, you can heap allocate or not as much as you want. I mean, sometimes you have to own the types, depending on what you're doing. But yeah, I think it's important to know what's going on. So, not that I don't want to sound gatekeepy or like elitist or whatever, but that's what I did. I tried very hard to understand how things work fundamentally from the ground up. And there's resources out there like Turing Complete, that game where you start by building logic gates and then they make it into a game of everything from building logic gates to building a CPU, but then there's an FPU, and then it has you implement everything from scratch in the form of a game.
Do you know what it's called?
Yeah, Turing Complete, the game. It's on Steam. I never played it, but I've seen videos. At one point, I was going to teach a computer science class at the prison. It got kind of shot down, but I have some of the learning material on GitHub, and the goal was to try to get that game for students so they could play the game and learn simultaneously, and then kind of give them that. It's tough because when you're saying, all right, I'm going to teach you how to program. And then you start by explaining like what a byte is and like what a bit is and like what a Turing machine is, like conceptually. And it starts to like not look anything like, they're like, really, like this is not what I necessarily like signed up for, you know? So it can be kind of off-putting, I think to like really, you know, super beginners. But I think, I don't know, people have, you know, if it's not something you enjoy, like I just honestly, like, I just don't necessarily like recommend it. Like, it is, you know, it's not easy. I don't know where this concept came from that software engineering and computer science in general is easy, but it is definitely not. And if you can't stand, you know, solving, you know, puzzles and reading about complex algorithms and, you know, learning about memory management and you know, if those are things that if they don't interest you, like I would be miserable. But thankfully, like I enjoy it, and I really enjoy learning, and I enjoy the whole process, and I consider myself super fortunate to have something that I love doing, like also happen to be the thing that like pays the bills and is like going to be a great career.
Yeah. Do you know the story about the roller coaster tycoon game?
Yeah, that I remember that game. How old are you?
23.
Wow,
I don't remember
man.
it.
I don't know how old I thought you were, but you're making me feel old.
Yeah, I think a few weeks ago I read that it was completely written in assembly, and I thought that's so cool.
Yeah, that is wild. Yeah, and that game was on every shelf in every store. Yeah, I'll never forget that one. I mean, that was like it was like free, and like you would get CDs like in the mail and stuff. Like, you know, that back when like shareware was big, they gave like a demo of games, and that's when Doom and Quake and all of those games were like, yeah, that was it was crazy back then. I can't imagine. Yeah, like
yeah, it also ran on everything apparently because it was so efficient.
Yeah, and then back then, right? Like the hardware was different. There wasn't it wasn't nearly as many CPU architecture. Like it was more or less like all you know, majority of desktop computers it ran on. I know it was a Windows thing, so it must have. Windows is funky. You can't even make syscalls in Windows. Like the kernel is like completely sandboxed. So I've never done Windows development, but I was just learning that the other day. So it must be interesting writing assembly on Windows.
Yeah. Well, this has been an incredibly interesting conversation. Thank you so much. Is there anything that you want to mention or shout out?
Yeah, no. First, like definitely, like thanks for having me. You know, this was a good time for sure. Yeah, I'd like to. I mean, just shout out to the Unlock Labs specifically. It's a really great cause, and they're great people. So definitely go check it out. Unlocklabs.org. And then you can find me on GitHub, github.com, pthorpe92. And LinkedIn is the same thing. pthorpe92 is generally my online handle.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a great conversation. I enjoyed it.